model, your business practice for illegal purposes. So, affinity schemes. Does anyone know what an affinity scheme is? So, when I was in San Diego, this is, it's a dated example, but it's an incredible example that I think is true today. We've seen them with the adaptation of the Ponzi schemes, but I worked a case called Operation Good Samaritan. Good Samaritan was an insurance company that didn't really exist, but this was a set of grifters that were moving through San Diego, posing as a group that was sponsored by essentially a shadow government. And they were soliciting investments through seminars, leasing Gulfstream jets, attending church services. And what they were holding themselves out as was, if we could capitalize an insurance company through investments, we could do sort of philanthropic things for each person. So if you're a church, we're going to have a Bible college that's going to be funded through the proceeds of this insurance company. If you are a charity, right? So AIDS research was another thing that this group was going to provide. So I'm out there, I'm looking for folks who are like-minded to invest into my scheme, and I'm going to develop a trusting relationship with them. And we had single investors coming in. It was in Mesa, Arizona, I believe, a single investor, $6 million investing into the scheme. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it was a $90 million scheme. And they were essentially promising returns that they never even paid, but because of that trust that they built with the customers, with their investors, they were able to take their money over and over again, continue to sell the goodwill, to continue to sell this sort of philanthropic side of this insurance company business that they never had to pay returns. But when they say affinity scheme, it's that sort of connection that you make with your investor, your customer. You know, we are of like mind. We are here to do the type of work in the community you want us to do, and at the end of the day, you're going to be part of that business, and you're going to make a profit, make a living off of it. At the end of the day, $90 million lost. The principal money launderer in the scheme was a former United States attorney who had gone to private practice. He had laundered the money through his attorney-client trust account, and at the end of the day, once he was indicted and he was searched, he took his own life. We had principal subject in the case, 30 years in prison, charged 20 individuals in that case. So that's the kind of harm that just a pure basic white-collar crime case can cause. Again, $90 million. I have investors into that scheme who lost their farms, lost homes, lost retirements, just a tremendous amount of havoc. One of the things that ultimately made that case for us, and here in Richmond, we're making cases with this, is our relationship with the lending institutions, our relationship with the banking institutions, our relationships with the folks who actually see the money moving in situations like that doesn't make sense with your ordinary workflow, your ordinary business practice. So if you're seeing somebody trying to conceal money, and I don't mean just avoiding taxes, a legal type of concealment's never good, but just concealing money, doing things that are outside of the normal sort of course of business. We had relationships in San Diego in that case where they would call us. And that's the value I get out of meeting with folks like you, is putting a face with the organization, so when you see things like that, you know who to call. But in that case, Bank of America, who we maintain a very close relationship with, just because of the volume of work that came from that institution, they worked with me. I did a short stint serving as case agent. I also did an undercover stint in that case to engage with these folks to collect evidence. And They provided access to their facilities. They basically worked in partnership with us to get to the bottom, to get to the truth of what was going on with this large customer set that they had that was doing things that didn't make sense to them. That's absolutely critical for us to be sort of seamlessly engaged with the community in order to effectively identify and ultimately mitigate these things. So when we were chatting out in the lobby, we talked about creating a culture within your organizations of beyond compliance and really into risk mitigation, looking for fraud, right? Looking for insider threat, looking for things transactionally that don't make sense to you, that you could pick up the phone and call us and we can discuss. Our director has likened the sort of expansion of cyber into everything we do, commercially and personally, as important to our agency and as impacting to our agency as the interstate highway system was in the 30s and 40s. If you look back in the sort of early gangster days, in the early sort of Bonnie and Clyde days, crime prior to the interstate highway system was sort of localized in your community. It was very difficult to sort of commit crimes interstate and to move quickly without getting caught from one state to the next to commit crimes. And law enforcement wasn't prepared for criminals exploiting that interstate highway system, committing a bank robbery in state one, going over state lines and committing another one in state two, and merging those and working those in a single federal jurisdiction. That's sort of what gave rise to the FBI and sort of muscled it up, was addressing those interstate criminal threats. And we are facing now with the cybercrime vector something like that internationally. It's very, very difficult to work complex cyber white-collar crime as a single agency alone in a silo without partnering with other global agencies in other countries, particularly in Asia, particularly in Eastern Europe, places where desperate folks with a high level of sophistication are able to access our systems and steal our data.
Question, sir.
Yes, sir.
How do you work with or even against other governments that may be actively supporting either through government subsidies or passive approval those very cyber criminals?
Sure, great question. So we've actually done recently, you saw with the Westinghouse case up in Pittsburgh and some of these other ransomware type cases where we indicted Chinese officials in that case. We've indicted Russians that are former Russian officials. It's a challenge, it's an absolute challenge. What we have to do is we have to work proactively from here, knowing we're not going to have the collaboration of those states, which means we have to be intrusive in our investigative efforts. You know, in some of the criminal threats, we do get good cooperation. But when you're talking about a state-sponsored threat, we're kind of on our own. Now, we do have great relationships with other friendly Five Eyes type countries, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, where we can look at networks, look at movements of money, look at other things that do inform us on the threats, because a lot of times they are financially motivated. But if you're dealing with those countries, you know, you have the diplomatic issues, working with the Department of State. You know, you have to get approvals for those cases, but we have done it, and we do it. We do indict foreign officials. In that case, it was the PLA folks from China. So, again, you have to rely on the technology. So if the question is how do you do it, you have to rely on the technology because you're not necessarily going to get it with the partnerships. But we have been effective, particularly recently, at doing that. So when I started my management career back in 2005, I I had a legislative background. I worked as a legislative staffer out in California, and the cyber threat, in terms of how it was managed by federal laws, Title 18 laws under the United States Code, it was a nascent program for us. It was really something that was the new frontier in terms of legislation to cover, and it was particularly a new frontier in terms of the partner engagement overseas, because we had willing countries in Eastern Europe and other places that wanted to collaborate with us, and they knew they had a threat, but they didn't have any laws to cover it, right? So hacking another country's financial data and exploiting it wasn't necessarily illegal in some of those countries. So we worked then in building the division. The division was established in 2003. So we were building mission space. We were trying to define what the FBI's role in cyber was. Because if you really start thinking about it, you can lose control of what you mean when you say cyber very quickly. So child exploitation online, a lot of this stuff's coming in from overseas. It's certainly criminal. Is that cyber? It's sophisticated. Some of it's encrypted. Some of it's in these dark chat rooms and things. So at that time it was intellectual property theft, right? So a lot of that stuff is stolen online. It's stolen through cyber intrusions and things. Is intellectual property theft cyber crime? Is it just intrusions? Is it disruptions? Is it malware attacks? Is it botnets? Is it DDoS attacks on our defense websites? Is it, what is it? What do we want to focus our efforts on? So 10 years later, the FBI as a lead agency for cyber has really narrowed its priorities and narrowed its cyber division to focus on the national security implicated intrusions. And then the other things that we've tried to develop our sophistication in terms of working child exploitation, but we've moved child exploitation, even the sort of cyber-enabled child exploitation, over to our criminal investigative division. Because we've kind of raised the game across the entire FBI in terms of looking at the cyber-enabled threats and having the expertise within our operational divisions to address them. And then our cyber division is really kind of a national security focused cyber intrusions investigative element. So our director has said, and I absolutely agree with him after my 19 years in the Bureau, that there are two types of companies in the United States relative to cyber. There are those that have been hacked, those that have suffered a cyber intrusion, and those that don't yet know they've suffered a cyber intrusion. So the notion of cybersecurity is sort of giving way to a new sort of conceptual, holistic conceptual thing of information governance. So we're no longer just trying to focus on securing our networks. You have to do that, but that's not the end of it, right? So your CISO and your company that's trying to secure your networks, what about the insider threat? What about people who have access, who are stealing your data and selling it, right? What about the PII information that you're storing, right? You're encrypting that stuff, but what if somebody has access to that, and then they take that data, sell it to a carding forum in Eastern Europe that uses it for credit cards? That exposes your company, right? So sort of having a package of information governance from all aspects. How are we securing our information? Are our networks secure? Do we have a vetting process for our employees? Do we have proper training in terms of how to manage PII data? Are we doing that type of sort of holistic protecting of our data? And so in terms of just providing a guidance from our perspective, the law enforcement perspective, that is absolutely essential to having a secure environment for your information. In terms of what we're seeing on the cyber side, one of the things that we've seen that we're actually leading for the Bureau here in Richmond are the ransomware attacks. This is something that can really impact your commercial enterprise, where a foreign actor will essentially get access to your system, find a backdoor into your system, and then encrypt all your data. And then they will reach out to you and say, if you want access back to your data, you got to pay this amount of money and send it overseas, and then we'll free up your system for you. We have tens of thousands of victim companies that are going through that right now. And many of them here in Richmond that sort of got us out in front of that, and so we're sort of managing that threat for the FBI, for the country, and the world, frankly. It's a huge issue overseas as well. How do they get in? You've seen the phishing emails, you've seen the spoofing emails, spoofed websites. So if your employees, they might get an email from you that says, hey, listen, I need you to take this training, click on this link. It's a quick 10-minute training on this new exploit we have in the system. They click on it, boom. They put malware into your system. It's a spoofed website or a spoofed email. Somehow they got your identification, sometimes social engineering, sometimes they get access through a business card or something else, and now they're contacting your employees as you, getting access to your system that way. You also see it on these spoofed links. So if they're on the web and this little pop-up that looks like a coupon for a local restaurant or something like that, click on it and it'll download a coupon. Sometimes they're even a coupon will show up. Sometimes they'll even have the legitimate thing and they'll spoof it good enough that it'll take you to the link that you think you want to go to, but meanwhile they're accessing and downloading malware into your system. So again, a culture of security. Are you training your folks? Are your folks looking for that? That's sort of the way forward on a lot of these things. So financially motivated intrusions, we've talked about that. Your companies, you guys are in the financial services industry, right? So hacktivism, have you thought about that? Right? So there are groups out there that want to do nothing but cause havoc for your industry. And these groups are sophisticated. A lot of them are sort of young engineer types, sort of the anarchist types that if they're not wearing the V is for Vendetta masks and smashing your windows, are trying to get into your systems just to create havoc. If you don't have USG money, you don't have US government money, it's very, very difficult to secure your networks from that. Very difficult. And we've seen Defense Department websites vandalized. We've had our own websites vandalized. Just something to think about, right? As part of that package. Compromises to third parties, huge risk issue for anyone in the commercial realm. Are you warehousing data for somebody else? Right? Are you warehousing in the lending industry, or in that lending workflow? I'm not a subject matter expert on that, but if you are housing data from other lenders, or you are housing tax data from business enterprises that are giving you that as part of their package to underwrite what they're doing with your company. If you're holding that, you have to hold that in a secure environment. Access to that can cause huge issues for your company on the liability side. Awareness mitigation strategies. Do you have a security plan in your company? Many don't. That's not what they do. The very, very last thing any company